Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the July desktop time. We hope you all are having a wonderful summer and staying out of the heat as best you can, or maybe enjoying the heat. I don't know. I kind of like the heat myself, but California is dry heat. So that Atlanta scaling new heights, wet heat, I don't like that. I like the dry heat. So anyways, welcome here today. We have a wonderful panelist with us today. We have Don Brolin, who we've been talking about, and also Amy Hosney from the IRS. So I'm going to turn the floor over to them in just a few minutes, but just normal introduction that we like to do every month. Desktop Time is sponsored by this company behind me, QBox. We're not going to talk about them today, but if you haven't tried us before, look us up. We also are going to be at Accountex coming up next month, and we'll be at QB Connect. I'm very excited about that one. If you want to know why, email me later. But we're excited to be part of that. We also, as of this week, are in the Intuit Marketplace for desktop. So look us up if you want more information. We'd be happy to get you whatever you need to learn about it. So with that being said, though, again, today we're very privileged to have Don Brolin with us and also Amy. I do have their bios from the website that you maybe have already read, but I'm going to go ahead and take a minute just to introduce them both. First, Dawn. Most people know Dawn. She's a certified public accountant, certified fraud examiner, CEO of Powerful Accounting, 2 locations in Connecticut and also in Wyndham and one in New Haven. Powerful Accounting is nationally recognized accounting, tax, forensic, and fraud, IRS and state agency audit professionals, as well as QuickBooks consulting firm. Recently, Powerful Accounting has partnered with Anderson, Brolin, and Koba CPAs LLC, a powerhouse tax preparation, consulting, and wealth management firm, where Don is also a partner. In addition, Powerful Accounting created a sister company, Your Turn LLC, where they specialize in application consulting and implementation for small businesses. And I'm just getting started. Don's list of professional.
Don't read it. You don't have to read the whole thing. They can go look it up if they want to know.
All right, if you want to read, it's really good. It's worth reading. It's on the website. It's worth reading. So that's Don. Don, she's just awesome. That's all there is to it. So Amy's awesome too. So Amy began her career at the IRS in 1991 as a revenue officer in the Civil Collection Division. She became a special agent for the Criminal Investigation Division in 1994. She works in New Haven, Connecticut, has investigated a myriad of white-collar financial crimes from traditional tax fraud to money laundering, Ponzi schemes, identity theft, and Bank Secrecy Act violations. In 2014, she became the Public Information Officer for the Boston Field Office, encompassing the 6 New England states. This collateral duty involves working with local media contacts to ensure publicity of all criminal prosecutions at each stage of adjudication. So also a very good introduction, good background, Amy. So.
Thank you very much.
So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over actually to Don to start us off today, and go ahead, Don, take it away.
Good. So first of all, we all learned that Chris can read, so that's good. So if you ask him to read a book, we can see that he'll be able to do that. That's not a problem. But no, thank you so much for having us on, Chris. You know how passionate I have been, and so I found my niche in 2011, which was all about IRS representation, civil and criminal casework, fraud forensic work, and where it's more than just the day-to-day accounting, but rather really just digging in to find out what happened. And that's actually when I met Amy. And we just became friends, and at the same time, we worked together quite a bit, and she just is such a great resource for us to learn, what's happening within the IRS, what's happening with crime. Tax fraud is crime. Any kind of tax fraud, whether it's evasion or simple underreporting on a civil level. And so she's really heavily involved down in New Haven and, of course, the Boston Field Office. So, Amy, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that Chris read a great bio, and there's so much more to you. We just don't have that kind of time. But, just tell us a little bit about what you're doing as far as, like, communications and relations for the IRS.
Sure. So, well, as Chris said, one of my main duties is to ensure publicity of our cases. And the reason that's critical for our agency is that voluntary compliance goes hand in hand with publicity and media coverage of our cases. If you see that your neighbor got prosecuted for tax evasion, well, then honest taxpayers are going to see that, and they're going to continue to comply with the tax laws. So on a day-to-day basis, I assist with drafting press releases. I work with reporters closely to get articles published. I write quotes and speeches for our management staff in Boston. I attend press conferences and outreach events like this today to educate the public and taxpayers on what we do.
So that's a fun, I would say fairly new avenue for you as you've been revenue officer and then in the CI unit. So let's just give us a little brief explanation of some of your fun daily tasks as a criminal investigator with the IRS, because that's what people really want to know.
Okay, so as a special agent, I still investigate cases as the PIO, just not as many. I probably spend about 50% of my time still investigating tax fraud, and we work those types of cases through the grand jury process. So we work hand in hand with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the federal prosecutors who prosecute our cases. And, you know, the first stage initially is to gather financial evidence. And we usually use the subpoena process. So we issue grand jury subpoenas to banks, financial institutions, brokerage firms, credit reporting entities, and so on. And we put together a complete financial picture of the person that we're investigating. And from there, it can be any type of case. It can be an embezzlement scheme. It can be a stock fraud type investigation. It could be identity theft fraud or straight tax evasion like most people think of when they think of the IRS, like Al Capone.
Yeah, and so, and you and I briefly, we spoke yesterday about it, and I know people are wondering, okay, when it comes especially to the financial aspect, and a lot of our audience are professionals, accounting professionals in some capacity. Now, and as you were saying about the subpoena, there are cases where you go. I'm gonna say it my way, and then you'll say it the right way. But you'll go to the grand jury and say, "Hey, here's the evidence we have. This is all this. We need a copy of, for example, the QuickBooks file. So we need a copy of that file, and we need all of this other stuff. And then there's a time when, on occasion, that you seize property.
Correct.
Right. And so what does that look like? Because obviously, if you seize the property and you don't get the QuickBooks file, maybe it's somewhere else. Like, what is that?
So most of our accounting software or books and records today are in electronic format. QuickBooks by far is the most common, but we also deal with Great Plains and other point-of-sale systems. And typically, if we do a search warrant on the case, we will also include in the items to be seized, you know, the accounting software and actually all the computers at the particular location. So that's typically how we will obtain the accounting software in electronic format.
Gotcha.
There are other means. We don't do search warrants in every case, but we can attempt to get it through subpoena of maybe the return preparer or outside bookkeeper that they may be using, or even the company itself if it's a corporation. So there's a myriad of ways that we can obtain the data files.
Sure. And that actually was really interesting in the one case that we worked on together, that we actually had to keep that data file in its original format. We had to go back to some 2000, I think it was, the actual data, you know, the actual software itself, which was kind of fun. And, you know, it's fun to me, but, you know, maybe I'm weird. But, yeah, so I think that's just really interesting information. And one of the things that, and we have a PowerPoint that we're not going to necessarily, like, go through a PowerPoint presentation, but they're at least talking topics that you and I can kind of go back and forth on. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. And, you know, mostly the reason why I wanted to show the PowerPoint was because it has the Department of Treasury badge on it. And that's, you know, Amy knows me very well. That's exciting to me. So.
Yes. Dawn was our expert witness at trial, and it was her job to explain to the jury basic accounting concepts. This is going way down to debits and credits, and then also the workings of the QuickBooks file that we were introducing into evidence.
Right.
She did a great job.
It was probably the most fun thing I've done in my entire career to date.
Good.
And it was, and more than anything else, it just because it was like, listen, you know, the numbers are the numbers, and a software system doesn't make a mistake. It's the person entering the data, you know, and so anyway, it was so much fun. We worked until 2 a.m, like weeks on end, and I think we did a great job, and it was a fun collaboration. And you know, justice was served, I guess is fair to say.
Yes, convicted of all counts, even on appeal.
Yep, even on appeal.
So
And
thank you for your help on that case.
Well, hey, you know, it changed my life, which I know you giggle about that, but it did, because it really enforced me what I wanted to do. So, so we're going to just jump in a little bit quickly here about we're going to talk about criminal and civil, although we know that Amy's involved heavily in criminal, but you have been in the civil area with regards to collections before. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the functions. A lot of people don't know the difference. A lot of people don't understand, you know, criminal versus civil, which I've been out there really hammering and clamoring to people about it so that they understand there is a difference. So if you want to just kind of talk about the organization, and we don't have to go too heavily into this because I do want to get into some of the cases that you have been involved in, but
sure.
People high level on that.
Sure. Well, on the civil side of the house, the main two positions that representatives and small businesses will come in contact with are the revenue officers, or ROs, and the revenue agents, and we call them RAs. And basically the ROs are tax collectors. They go out and they work with taxpayers that either are delinquent on filings or they owe a past due balances. And it can be 941 taxes, income tax, corporate tax, and we work with them to get them in compliance. We might set up a payment plan. They may be able to full pay. We get them current on their tax filings, and hopefully get them on the right road.
So if you don't mind me asking, so with the revenue agents, I have found, do you find it helpful as a previously being a revenue agent, the accounting professional, whether it be a bookkeeper, whether it be you know, the CPA or the enrolled agent or whoever it is, do you find that beneficial from the IRS's perspective to have someone other than the taxpayer, because they really don't, they think that you just want to take your house away, right? Because they just don't
Yes.
get it. So do you find that it's helpful to work with people like us?
Definitely. And just to clarify, I was not a revenue agent, but I was a revenue officer. But it's the same situation. We would rather deal many times with a representative, an enrolled agent, a CPA like yourself, someone that understands the system and how it works and the steps that we have to go through. Most taxpayers are, I mean, they're scared of the process. They don't understand it. They don't want to deal with it many times. And, you know, some will handle it on their own, and it works out fine. But I've just found that it seems to go smoother and quicker if there is a representative involved in the process.
And so, I know, and then this, you know, I didn't have you calculate this ahead of time, but do you find that it's the majority of taxpayers that these revenue officers and revenue agents have to deal with are self-representing them, you know, where it's like, you know, or are you finding more and more professionals starting to kind of get involved in the mix? Like, is there even like a difference?
I think there is. When it gets to the field level, usually either the dollar amount is higher or there's some complex issues involved. So I would say the majority of the cases that I dealt with as an RO, we had a representative handling the matter.
Interesting. And so from the criminal function, you know, the criminal perspective, that's obviously significantly different because, you know, like a civil audit, it's like, here's a notice and, you know, you're getting audited, so get your stuff together. And then I have seen cases where the people basically ignore it the whole way, and they will go, they'll move to a criminal aspect for various reasons. That's not the only reason. You know, not responding to a notice doesn't put people in a criminal level. But but so from the criminal function, what are those special agents primarily doing? I think you do it, but
it is a totally different arena because primarily we're working through the grand jury process. There are administrative tax cases which are worked within the IRS initially, and then once they're all nice and neatly done and completed, all our evidence is gathered, then it moves over to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Okay.
My husband's sneaking in and looking in the window and listening.
Now that's a guy, well, that's because that's part of what he does, but I would love to have him on this show sometime. That's a whole other ballgame, people.
I'll talk to him about that.
See what you can do for me. But, okay, cool. So, you know, obviously we know the mission of the IRS. Everybody's fairly aware of that. But let's talk a little bit more about the enforcement. Like, let's talk about this slide you have here, because who doesn't love to look at a picture of a pile of money?
Yes, that's our job. We follow the money.
Right.
So obviously, our special agents have jurisdiction over the tax laws, the tax code, and criminal violations that we investigate. And we're the only federal law enforcement agency that can do that. And then in addition, we also can investigate money laundering violations. And then Title 31 is, there's a lot of statutes under that code. One is structuring, like if you structure cash transactions in amounts under $10,000. There's also bulk cash smuggling. There's a myriad of statutes that we can investigate that relate to bank secrecy.
Right. And you know, it's interesting too about that. In again, just trying to compare both civil and criminal investigation, audits, whatever you want to call them, both of them are always about following money. Right.
That's correct.
And then it comes to a certain level where it's like, wait a second. And I do recall, I do CPE myself and watch webinars and learn a lot from Eric Green about the various aspects. But sometimes you have to work in conjunction with, let's say, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA.
Correct. Because
especially in a money laundering scenario, right?
Yeah. So we work many of our cases jointly with other federal agencies, state and local police departments as well. Yeah. And usually that's a task force setting. And I think I have a later slide that lists some of the federal agencies that we work with. Right. But that is a way that we can bring our financial expertise to the table and our forensic accounting skills to help trace the money. And for example, a drug case, we're going to focus on the higher level members of the drug organization, usually the leaders, so to speak, versus the lower level dealers and money runners and that kind of thing. So we're going to put together a complete asset picture, attempt to forfeit or seize assets that were purchased with the proceeds. And also, if we can, we'll tag them with some federal tax violations as well to make the case stronger.
Right. Yeah, and that's interesting too, because with regards to working with local agencies, so because I'm a psycho, which don't worry, everyone knows Amy. Amy knows, but so doesn't everybody else. But I did do a handful of ride-alongs with the state police, and even at that level, I worked with one of the officers on a check cashing scheme and trying to help them identify, because they don't study bank laws or even just, examining a check to find out, what bank did it go to or who signed off on this, where can we maybe identify where this person banked and those kind of things. So that's kind of the fun part, but that's really the basic level, not what you guys are doing, but I can totally see how that's happening.
Yes.
So yeah, let's relate those special agents, because certainly, Amy, you're funny when we talk that, the accounting side of it is such a strong thing for you guys to know, and you do, and as working with you. So tell us a little bit how that relates together and how this all the accounting and the investigation kind of intertwine.
Sure. Well, you really need that forensic accounting skill to analyze the books and records and also analyze the bank accounts and all the finances, really. It could be brokerage accounts, stock transactions. You have to have that detail-oriented accounting-like mind to put it all together. And that's really the fun part of the job. Some people find it boring, but, actually flipping checks and, getting an account and being able to look at it. And many times we're doing that when the case is still covert. So the defendant doesn't know that we're looking at their entire financial picture, so to speak.
Right.
And, you know, obviously you can find out so much about a person or their business through that analysis. So I, like you, find that very exciting and fun. Other people might not.
Hey, listen, everybody's got their thing. That's what I always say, right?
That's right.
And it is. And again, part of what I think is exciting about it is that every day something's different. You know, you're not actually walking into the office reconciling another bank statement. You know, I mean, those days are almost gone anyway. But, you know, I just see that whole investigative mindset and how we as accounting practitioners, we aren't charged to do that. And I think that's really interesting if you think about it. Even in a criminal case, I have one going on right now, not me personally, but I'm involved working with one right now where even just a due diligence process of a client who hands you an Excel spreadsheet. This is so classic. They hand you an Excel spreadsheet and they give you, you know, here's all the money these people all paid me. This is my total gross revenue, and here are the expenses that I have, and you know, based on what my credit card statement says or whatever. And off they go, and they give it to the accountant. The accountant prepares a return, and now they get a civil audit. And the auditor, all they've got to do is take the bank statements, add up the deposits, find out where, you know, the transfers were kind of like in the way as total, you know, some of those deposits. They weren't really a deposit, it was a transfer. But that one simple process for us as accounting professionals and tax preparers, if we made that part of our standard process, no, we're not auditing their books. No, we're not, you know, doing some kind of huge investigation before we prepare a tax return. That's ridiculous. Because people would never pay for that. But even just that one process, I mean, that's like the first thing you guys are going to do. You're going to pull the bank statements and you're going to say, okay, let's see how much was deposited, how much, you know, was reported as gross revenue. And that one simple thing can make or break somebody in just one thing out of the millions you might find.
Exactly. And that, obviously, that accountant interview is very important. If they used an accounting firm, we want to know, what did they get? If they just got a summary, like a gross receipts number, and the accountant has no idea how this was arrived at, or maybe they just totaled up all the deposits to one business bank account and that was it. You know, they got the QuickBooks file, and there you go. There's your, you know, monthly deposits. You got 12 months. That's your gross receipts. That's what goes on the return. When there might be 4 or 5 other bank accounts that this taxpayer was utilizing that, gee, they forgot to disclose. So,
you know, hey, I forget where I put my money. You know, I got another $500,000 over there and $500,000 over there. It's hard to remember everything. No, that doesn't cut it, right? So
doesn't cut it.
It doesn't cut it. So tell us, this is one of my favorite ones because it's, you know, I always tell people I don't want to scare you, but I do want to prepare you. And so this is one of my favorite pieces. So tell us about this.
Well, our conviction rate has always been above 90%. And I think it just comes down to the fact that we're dealing with documentary evidence. I mean, with the advent of the internet and e-currency and electronic transactions, you don't see as many checks, but still people use checks and cash.
Sure.
So, I mean, when you have the check and you have a wire transfer statement, or, you know, you have the bank statements, you have all the deposits total, whatever method of proof we're using, it doesn't really get any better than that. Then you get the witness in who paid the money and you say, what did you pay this for? Yes, it was for services provided, therefore it's income. And, you know, it's very difficult to refute that. And the fraud penalty, as you know, the civil fraud penalty is 75%. So if they, you know, $500,000, they're looking at $375,000 in additional penalty for the underreported.
On top of the
interest and tax.
Yeah, and it just starts getting really crazy.
Yeah, so, you know, in addition to the prison term, now you're paying a significant amount of money.
Yeah, you're pretty much all done. That's
pretty
what
much.
I told people. If you're going to steal money and evade taxes, it better be in the billions. That's a whole nother level above billions, because you need to get out of Dodge. Like this, it is not worth it because
It's not worth it.
you are going to pay, you are going to get caught. You know, it's just like I say the murderer. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's few and far between of people that get away with that. And so, you know, you just have to, you know, stick with, you know, being an ethical person. You know, and sometimes the clients just aren't, and they don't tell you the whole story. And so we can do the best we can with due diligence, but the conviction rate and the prison sentencing guidelines, which are insane if you looked at them, they are what they are. But if you look at those guidelines, you would just be blown away, and that's something we maybe can do in another session. But here comes Chris, which means he's got a question.
Okay.
You're muted. Yep. No, you're muted. Yeah, you're muted. Yeah, there's no
hand signals for you guys.
I'm working on that.
I'm chiming in on behalf of the cold sweat people that have been hearing all this. So, I mean, in general, I would assume, and maybe we can address this hopefully, I'm assuming that people that are doing fraudulent things or committing Ponzi schemes or laundering or stealing, they know what they're doing. Whereas opposed to people that are just kind of negligent in their accounting and lazy, and you know, maybe they're out there turning, you know, or hitting a hammer and they're making a bunch of money but not good at, you know, keeping records of things. So those people are more going to experience penalties and scrutiny because they haven't been diligent about keeping financial records, I'm assuming.
Yes. Obviously, that would fall into the civil arena. Mm-hmm. And probably an audit process where they would come up with a deficiency that the taxpayer would owe. But in a criminal case, one of the elements that we have to prove is intent, which can be difficult sometimes. So that's really the key difference. Mm-hmm. Did the individual or business owner have the criminal intent to defraud and evade their taxes? Okay. And so we have to come up with evidence, and it could be various affirmative acts, maybe a double set of books where, you know, they have the one that they're going to give their accountant, and then they have the one over here where they're entering their true income. That's why we like to do search warrants, because many times we'll get the critical evidence that they might not turn over in response to a subpoena, or it would be difficult to obtain. So, I mean, the key difference is intent. And sometimes that is inferred by a number of acts. And it can be a pattern of evasion over several years. It can be significant dollar amount. I mean, if it's hundreds of thousands of dollars or, you know, $2 million, well, that in and of itself can be an inference of intent. So there's many things that we look at, but we definitely have to prove that. The difference between a civil audit and a criminal prosecution is, in an audit, it's up to the taxpayer basically to prove, you know, what they put on their return and show the records and the receipts and so forth. In a criminal case, we have to prove what their income is and what the unreported amounts are. So it's a big difference.
Yeah, and I also just to chime in on that, I had something happen a few years ago where a client, and that's why I brought up the whole add up the bank, even if we as practitioners get an Excel statement and require them, if that's all they're going to give us, that they give us copies of the bank statements, that we can at least do a little bit of due diligence. So I saw a few years ago a case that was civil, and the volume of underreporting, because what the person did was just rely on 1099s. Mm-hmm. But because then when the civil auditor went through and saw that they were so severely underreported that and then they didn't file returns for a few years. So for that particular case, it was referred to criminal because of, like you said, the inference that, okay, they underreported for 3 years in such a significant fashion, and then they didn't file for 3 years, gives an inference of some kind of intent to not pay taxes, to evade those taxes. So and I want to the reason why is because people who are listening today, I want to make sure they understand that, yes, there is a total clear separation. At the same time, there still is these inferences. So if somebody is not, you know, they're giving you summaries and the revenue is not changing, but they drove in a Cadillac where they used to drive in a little beat up Chevy. those are kinds of things, and they do look at, right, Amy? You guys do look at lifestyle as part of
Definitely.
maybe more down the road, but that's part of your analysis is, hey, listen, this person's saying that they make revenue, or whatever, their AGI is 200,000 a year, but they own, 4 places in the Bahamas and go to Italy every other week, and they're driving in these fancy cars, and their kids are going to private school and college for $100,000 a year, and yet they only make 200 grand a year. It just doesn't add up.
Exactly. We're going to look at the entire picture, and we also want to work cases that have jury appeal in that sense, versus maybe a business owner who has a severely handicapped child who's they have significant medical expenses, and they're scraping by, they're barely, and maybe they're underreporting, and maybe they get audited and they have a deficiency, but that's not going to rise to the level of a criminal case with those kinds of circumstances, typically.
Right. And every case is different, just like every client is different.
Exactly. That makes the job fun.
Yeah.
I was going to say that the cases we all see in the media are these, sports players that are making these big amounts of money that are being investigated for underreporting, or movie stars. And I always laugh. I wonder, did they report, I only made $30,000 this year, and then lo and behold, they're in 10 movies, and, or signed some big contract that's obviously all over the media. And so I think some people just don't, they're criminal.
Well, and they say, they have greed. Exactly. Yeah. What are the chances? I'm like, well, I can tell you what, I don't want it to be that 0.0001% or whatever it is. I don't want that to be me, right? So I'm just not willing to take that chance. But that's a good point, Chris, because Amy and I both know it's, I don't know how many movie stars or athletes that Amy has had in a criminal investigation. They're self-employed people. They're, your local salesman. It's your local, restaurant owner, your local accountant. I mean, it's possible.
Yes. Local attorneys.
Yeah. So any other questions you got, Chris?
Well, I was just, so in kind of in line of that with people that are listening in today, we're assuming everyone listening today is on the right side of this, and maybe just don't always have the best practices for keeping the record. So let's say we have somebody that looks suspicious. They get flagged by whatever mechanism the IRS uses. Really, the admonishment today or suggestion is that they always are very diligent in using a financial professional to validate their expenses and their income of the business. But when it comes to an audit, I mean, I heard you, Don, mention sometimes they just have the proverbial spreadsheet or some very basic shoebox information. What's the recommended method to present yourself before an auditor? What should they have in hand, in addition to their financial professional, but how are they best prepared if they do find themselves in that situation?
Dawn, I think I'll let you have at it with that one.
Sure. Yeah, no, well, and so I've had the knock on the door. Not going to lie, I was excited. Probably the only person in the world that's ever been excited when a CI agent comes to the door. But really what you have to be prepared with is, and this is something that for myself and going through these types of cases, I've become much more diligent with my own clients that I do tax returns for, and saying, listen, if you're not going to have a receipt, like we use Receipt Bank, if you're not going to have receipts and be able to document and back up and justify the expenses that you're providing to me, then I don't know if I want to work with you. Like, I feel that because of the technology, because there's such an, it's just made accounting so easy, that there's no reason why people shouldn't be able to justify income and expense, and in all cases to support the tax return. So if you're a professional and someone comes to you, let's say you get the knock on the door, or you can just get the civil audit letter, either way, and it's your client. You're going to want to make sure you have your work papers, that you have, your communications with the client, that you have, your engagement letter that states, hey, listen, your job, client, is to give me all of your information. I'm not going to audit your books, but understand that you're responsible, because I'll tell you right now, the first thing that these people are going to do is go, well, my accountant must have made a mistake. Because they think we know their business like inside and out, like we run it. They think we run their business. They think we're QuickBooks. They think we're QBox. They think we're Receipt Bank. We're not. We're the practitioner. Without all that backup and having that information, work papers, and all of that stuff, which is why we're supposed to have it. I mean, it's part of tax preparation is to have at least work papers, at least documentation to CYA. And so, and for me, if I will also give this recommendation, if there's a knock on the door and you're being approached by an agent, you may consider taking the agent's card and saying, you know what, I definitely obviously will respond to you, because you never tell them I'm never going to talk to you again, right? So you just say, hey, listen, you know what, be nice, and they're just people as well. They're not trying to take away your home. But if they come to the door, hey, you know what, I'm not comfortable. I've never had this happen before. I would like to, call my attorney. Please give me your card, and then we can take it from there, because you don't have any idea what you're doing. And clients, the same thing. I mean, you want to be cordial. You don't want to be combative in any capacity, but you want to, if you don't know what you're doing, you might want to just be cautious if you get the knock on the door.
And I just want to add, if I could, that
yes.
In all the cases that I've worked over the years, I've dealt with countless practitioners and CPA firms, and usually early on it was a summons procedure, and then through the subpoena process. We go in, we never make an appointment, we just show up and knock on the door, but we give them the subpoena, and the records that we've always gotten have been very organized. We've gotten all the work papers, we've gotten all the email communications, QuickBook files, always very cooperative and professional. And again, we just have to make sure that they weren't complicit in any way, and I've never had a case myself where they were. They did not receive, they were duped too, basically, in many instances. They go through, they might have a planner that the taxpayer has to fill out, and they ask the questions, do I have all of your income? Do you have any other bank accounts? They go through the due diligence, and they can only work at the end of the day with the information that they're provided with. If they have a separate set of books for everything that's going overseas and you don't know about it, how are you going to, you're just not going to know.
Yeah.
So.
And more to my point of the basic due diligence of the bank statement adding up versus the summary, to me is more of a protection to my client. Not necessarily that I'm trying to protect myself or whatever. It's really, that's my job.
Sure.
And so that's just a simple due diligence. Again, our clients hire us because they trust us to do the right thing and to help them do the right thing. Now, if you ask for that information and the client refuses to give it to you, then you have a whole nother problem. And that may be where you say, oh, red flag, this person just wants to give me their Excel spreadsheet. They're not willing to give me even just a simple page 1 of the bank statement to show me the deposits. Then I've got a problem here.
Yeah.
So, it's just be ethical, people. That's in your salt. Right?
Well, I think too nowadays, and I think you mentioned this at the outset, Amy, that even because I think like here in California, I'm an old guy now, and I think of all the stories of my friends who are contractors, and the typical story, the guy decides I can do this on my own, goes out the door, and I think a lot of people are just flat out intimidated by the IRS in general. So
I agree.
They tend to hide out. They tend to, and nowadays, of course, and I know I'm probably not supposed to say this, but you have these attorneys advertising everywhere, let me help you fix your balance, and they're spending more money, and it becomes this bigger thing instead of just addressing it, dealing with a financial professional, help getting themselves organized, and doing a proper interface with the IRS just to have it resolved. They tend to kind of shuck and hide, and so it makes them act, I think.
I've seen that countless times, especially as an RO. I've found, a taxpayer will hand me a stack of letters from the IRS that were never opened. Like, they don't even open the letters. So it's that fright and being scared of the process. And, I think IRS can be partly blamed in some ways. We need to focus sometimes more on customer service, and I think we're doing a better job at it. even just now setting up appointments for taxpayers when they need to come in, instead of showing up and waiting in line. People don't want to deal with that. They don't have time. So we're finding that that's really helping. And, you know, there's a number of steps that we're taking, and at the end of the day, we're getting the financial support from Congress to, you know, get better in these areas. So as an agency, we're definitely working on it, but I would just say to those taxpayers, you know, just schedule an appointment and come in. The best thing you can do is deal with it head on. Go see a financial professional like Dawn and get straightened out and move forward. You'll feel a lot better.
Well, and you're absolutely right about that, because people are terrified, and it's like, no, well, calm down. It's, you know, these guys, you know, and this is one of the things, you get involved in representation, and it's a strategy to handle the client, because they are like, when are they going to show up at my door? When are they coming to my workplace? It's like, no, you're in a civil audit. I'm in communication with the auditor. You know, everything's cool unless we don't work with them. If I stop calling them, or you stop communicating, or whatever the case is, that's when you're going to have a problem. It's not if you're cooperating, you know.
Exactly. Communication is key, and just keeping the, you know, if they ask for documents, usually it's in a written format by a certain date. If you can't meet the date, call them up. I need another couple, you know, days. Is Friday okay? And they're fine. They're professionals too, and they'll work with you to get the job done.
Absolutely, 100%. This is scary, so we'll take this one off. But these were some of the other people that were going to be involved. So people that are under special assignment. But there's a few things I want to get to.
Sure. Some of this I use for recruitment too, so it might not be appropriate.
This is a good one. This is another good one that I enjoyed. The different agencies that we talked about a little bit earlier that you guys also work with.
Sure. So these are some of the main agencies. Obviously, FBI we work with most closely, I would say. They have a task force for everything, whether it's terrorism, cybercrime, bankruptcy fraud, financial crimes. Some of these, obviously, DEA, everybody knows. They work primarily narcotics investigations. ATF, HHS works hand in hand with the FBI and also IRS on healthcare fraud cases. And I was on a task force for years working healthcare fraud cases. Obviously, always looking at the financial end of it and seeing if there's any tax violations. Sometimes we would go with a money laundering charge if that was more appropriate. But every federal agency, from HUD to VA to Department of Education, all have a criminal investigation component. Many are very small, and they're usually called inspector generals. But so this is just the top ones that we work with regularly. But there's probably hundreds more.
Right. Which you want. We want you guys all working together.
Exactly.
Now, so this was one of my favorite parts of what we were going to talk about is, not want to say favorite, that's probably not even right. I don't know why I get excited about this stuff, but this is where I think accountants need to start focusing. I just wrote a blog article about this.
Yes.
You know, this whole selling personal information, compromising, and you and I know, remember we talked about how the CPAs and the EAs and the financial people are a big target.
They are a huge target, and we could talk about identity theft, and there's some later slides where we go into how this has evolved over time. But one of the things that fraudsters do when they get a hold of your identity is, you know, they'll probably open some credit cards, or try to anyway, maybe get some loans in your name, you know, get a driver's license, who knows. But one of the other things that they're also doing is filing a fraudulent tax return in your name under your social. So, you know, we've gotten better as an agency in stopping this. So now what the fraudsters are doing is they're targeting CPA firms and financial services firms and taking over their, it's a data breach, data intrusion. where they go into their network and steal the information that way. So they're taking maybe last year's tax return and they're going to use it this year, but it's going to look very similar. It's going to have the same sources of income. The only thing they might change is where the refund's going to go. And they're going to jack up some of the expenses and deductions.
Right.
So that's been a huge problem. We have a ID theft coordinator who happens to work in New Haven, and he's on the phone all day long, especially during filing season, with CPA firms and practitioners who have been victimized in this way. So we figured some of them will be on this webinar today, and hopefully they're taking steps to prevent this from happening.
So, and I love that in the way that you and I had talked about specifically at one point about the number of reportings, because CPAs and EAs and tax practitioners don't want anyone to know that their information has been compromised.
That's correct.
Right.
Sometimes we were hearing from the client first. They would call in a complaint, and not the practitioner, because they were concerned that they were going to lose clients if the word got out that there was a data breach at the firm. So we've had many press releases at the national level just urging them to come forward as soon as possible so we could track down the offenders, because working those types of cyber crimes is very labor intensive. It's a totally different type of investigation.
So interesting too, because this is one of the things, again, that I've really been trying to harp on when I'm speaking, is the client who will come in, and now I'm really steering them towards not taking a paper copy of their return and keeping their source documents in paper format, because for there's many different ways, from like you said, street level, like this says street level crime, where people are they're coming, either they're putting their papers down where they shouldn't, leaving them on the front seat of their car with their social security numbers, addresses exposed right on the front seat of their car. And so these types of data breaches aren't just, well, they're going to fish into my computer and do it, but rather, other methods like that. I mean, you're probably seeing a lot of that as well.
Yeah, what we saw, like, say, 10, 12 years ago, when it was more of a street level, it was all paper returns versus electronic, and they would have checks issued, and then there would be check runners. There would be a whole network of individuals involved in the scheme, and they were stealing many of the socials from Puerto Rican residents, because they don't have to file a U.S. tax return if they don't have income in the U.S.
Right.
And they're just living on the island of Puerto Rico. So we saw a flood of these. We call them OMM investigations. That stands for something, but I can't recall what.
Lots of acronyms.
I had one, and we were able to determine from some of the interviews. We actually went to Puerto Rico and tracked some of these people down, and basically they said, no, I never filed that return. And they would use original or valid employers like Best Buy or Walmart, but they would just put an actual person and a social that belonged together, but they had never worked for that company. So it was very easy to establish that just by reaching out to the payroll department of Walmart. Did this person ever work here? No. So, and we have cross-references electronically to do that as well. So we were able to stop a lot of those. And the nice thing with the paper returns is we would get their fingerprints. So, that was, and we can arrest them. But then, as time went on, as we got better at stopping those before any refunds would go out, they got more sophisticated. And now it's mainly e-filed returns, many coming from overseas. Russia is a big hotspot, Nigeria, Belarus. I had a case where all the IP addresses were foreign. And that was an interesting case. We had victims throughout the country who had had a tax return filed in their name where a refund was issued. And we had basically like runner or mule bank accounts in the U.S. and one individual was in Connecticut. And what they did was they set up like basically fake websites. So all the people, the common link was they Googled free file. They got to the site, they started putting in their personal, we call it PII, personal identifying information. They didn't finish a return before they did anything else. A return was filed in their name, and they were basically a victim. Now, we make them whole. We'll work with them so that they could file and get the proper refund that they're due, but then we have to try to track down the funds from the bad guys. So basically what we were seeing on these bank accounts in Connecticut were a lot of ATM withdrawals overseas, many in Belarus. So the refunds were, some were going in there before we stopped it. Once we found out, obviously, we stopped the returns. Like the accounts were frozen and closed. But we got the defendant to come back to the U.S. Because he was in the process of getting his citizenship. And so we sent him a letter, actually to his parents, stating that he had an appointment coming up. And sure enough, about a week before, he showed up, and we arrested him at the airport, and he claimed he didn't do any of the returns. It were all these bad guys in Belarus, and come over with me and I'll show you where they are, and that kind of thing. But unfortunately, we don't have a relationship with the government of Belarus. If we did, things might have worked out differently. But he served 2 years, and then he was deported.
Like, anyway. How is that not fun, Amy?
That was fun. That was fun. That was a fun case.
Such good stuff. I love it. Now I know, because we have. Are there any questions in the chat, Chris, before I move on? Because I know we only have let's see, 7 minutes left.
No, actually, so far so good. No, there was someone encouraging you to plug in your Mac, but other than that.
Oh, thank you. Yes, they saw my no power. I'm like, yeah. That's why I jumped over onto the floor to grab the charger, because that's crazy. But and I would like to move a little bit to the different types of ID fraud. Obviously, we always talk about the tax return stuff, but the credit card fraud and especially the employment fraud that you're seeing. I mean,
yeah, if you go back one slide,
okay, yep.
Just to kind of, so every year the Federal Trade Commission, there you go, receives reports from victims of various fraud schemes, and we've actually, this shows that we've done a good job in reducing the ID theft tax fraud. As you can see down at the bottom, it's gone down 46%. It's been, so of the 2.7 million reports they got for 2017, ID theft was number 2. So we're a big part of that as an agency, and you can see now they've kind of increased the credit card fraud again. The tax returns weren't getting processed, they weren't getting the bogus refunds, so now they're back to focusing more on the credit card fraud. They just don't quit. But and there's a reason for that. We've partnered with private industry, state tax agencies, Intuit is a big one, and financial institutions have been huge in helping us stop surf fraud.
Yeah, and that's just, it's so terrible. And I will say, just as we're talking through and thinking, we all complain that taxes are going up, but it's really, we're not just paying for those who aren't paying taxes, but we're also paying for people who are stealing the tax money.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just insane. It's total craziness. So, so I just want to talk a little bit about that part. So this is also really good. Some of the things that you guys are doing proactively, and you mentioned a couple things, but how are we, what are you guys doing to try to, I know awareness campaigns, like we all know about the phone calls. Yes. I got one today. I got another one today.
Yeah, I think everyone has, and it's amazing the numbers that, I think I brought our most recent fraud numbers on that, but it's amazing to see how much has actually been paid out by victims. And so, Chris, where are you from? What state? You're in California?
California. And actually, I just got one of those cell phone calls last week telling me
California
I
has
right
the
away,
number one. You're ranked number 1 with number of victims and loss. Over 2,200 victims have fallen to this scam. and paid over almost $14 million. Like, it's just mind-boggling. And there's been several prosecutions throughout the country. And I don't know if you saw in the news last year, but in India, there was a large call center that was shut down. And that was where a lot of the calls were emanating from. Now they're like the computer bot calls. I don't know, the one you got, Dawn, was like computer generated. They keep kind of changing it, and you know, they're diligent, I'll say that, and persistent. And the reason is that these poor victims, many of them elderly, are still paying over money to them, despite the campaigns and press releases and the media coverage that we've gotten on it. We had this tax security awareness, you know, campaign in Hartford last filing season, where the mayor came and there were several media outlets there, and Better Business Bureau spoke as well, and just talked about basic steps you could take to protect yourself. So as you can see, I'm not going to go through the numbers, but you know, we've done a better job. Obviously, we need to continue, but I think it's been the partnership that we formed with the private sector and the state taxing agencies that really helped to curb this type of fraud.
Yeah, definitely. So I should be under arrest at any minute, just so you know, because I got a call today. Tracy slacked me and said, "Hey, just want to let you know you got a message. You're going to be under arrest soon. Here's the number." Now, I will tell this one other quick little story, and then I think we'll wrap it up. But I wanted to tell this one. It was about 6 months ago. Actually, probably wasn't even that long ago. But one of our clients got the call, and her husband had cancer in a severe way, and so she was already at this like psychotic level for understandable reasons. She gets the phone call. She calls me, tells me about it. I said, "Okay, great. Give me the phone number." So she gave me the phone number, and I called them. I called back. And
you told me this.
Yeah, remember? And I actually sent it to you because I reported it right away.
Yeah.
And so I called the lady back. I recorded the call, which is even funnier. If anyone wants the transcript or wants to hear the recording, I'll throw it up on my website. It's hysterical. And, you know, it was just like, she just had no clue. And I said, okay, she's like, "Can I call you back?" I said, "Sure. You know what? I just have a landline, but I'll be on the road tomorrow if you want to call me." Like, I told her I was going to be on a landline, but I was going to be in my car. So how do you bring up that? I mean, there's probably 10 or 15 different, like, tiny little things that I said that she just
didn't add up.
Right over her head.
No, it was probably the language barrier.
Oh yeah. What was it? Washington D.C. Washington. You're under arrest for theft or something. I mean, the recording's fantastic. It really is. Everyone should listen. But Amy, I just want to thank you so much for taking your time to come on today, you know, to talk about and the different things. And, you know, if people who are listening want to hear more topics and that we could maybe come to, Amy is also, you have some other resources of people who, on different topics, right, that we could maybe jump in on and keep this conversation going. So if there's anything specific. Is there anything you want? Why don't you close up? Is there anything you have to say before Chris wraps this up that you'd like to close with?
Again, I would just say thank you, Dawn and Chris, for having me on. If you know, I'd love to talk about some of the actual cases in some of these arenas. If you have another opportunity and your viewers would like to hear about them. That's what I love as PIO, to just see the great work that's being done all over the country, but especially in New England where I am.
Right.
It's very satisfying.
If you maybe want to pick a date, Chris, that we could do we're only going to talk about cases.
Yeah, absolutely. We would love to do that. We'd love to have you back.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Sounds good.
You're in, Amy, though. You're in. and I know where to find you, and I can get past those guards. You know I can.
I know.
Now, just as you're saying that, people are chatting, great information. Please come back. So we definitely would want to do that. So
awesome. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Well, I think, you know, honestly, me being Joe, you know, taxpayer, maybe not regular guy, but I think these are wonderful interactions because we are talking about people that are exploiting the system, which are impacting all of our expenses and our tax liability. But, there's also this whole group of people that are just overwhelmed and intimidated. And I think just having this personal interaction hopefully incites them to say, okay, yeah, I am in a hole, but I can resolve it. The IRS wants to work with me. They're not, a lot of people have this perception of the IRS, they're this evil, army behind the wall that only wants to throw them in jail. So I think it's fantastic to have this type of interaction and just across all spectrums to give them some good financial understanding of how they should manage their business and how they should be responsible, but also if they get to that point where they are under the radar, how they should appropriately deal with it rather than run and hide and leave those letters unopened in their drawer or answer one of those calls from the bots.
Exactly.
They're going to be arrested, which they're not going to be. So anyway, so this has been, and someone else just chimed in also that they appreciated it. So definitely thank you very much, and we would love to have you back anytime. I'll email you offline and see if we can figure out another month that works for you.
That sounds good.
Okay, excellent.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you, Chris, for having me too. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Don, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, not to beat a dead horse, thank you very much, Don and Amy, both. I think that was incredible information, and we did just kind of scratch the surface, I think, today, but would love to have this, in another forum in the future, so we'll make everyone aware of that. Thank you for joining us today for our July desktop time. We will be back next month. We're going to have our guest host who's just being added to the website today. It'll be Brandon Morris. I don't know if all of you are familiar with Brandon, and also Fishbowl Inventory is going to be doing a demo of their product as well. We're going to have Seth Price with us. So thank you very much again for taking time out of your day to join us. And now I know it's summertime, so you really you're not in tax season. We know you're probably going to go golf now or go surf or whatever you do, which is good. That's a good thing.
We have a lot of surfing in Connecticut.
That's another California. Yeah. The people in the Midwest, whatever you like to do, go water skiing. I don't know. Anyways. Thank you very much again for joining us today. We'll look forward to seeing you hopefully all back next month. Thank you again, Don and Amy, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.